This is an open letter written by Amir Khashayar Gassemi. Dear Art Toronto director Mia Nielsen, hello, I am writing you from Iran, a land that you know for its ancient civilization and its many beauties, its brutal dictatorship and repeated human rights violations, and its elites who have left us and are now among you. And I am talking to you, Canadians, who are the creators of the Declaration of Human Rights. I speak to you from a land where systemic elimination, as well as sectarian and ideological censorship, is the norm of this land and its rulers. A few days ago, I was made aware of the potential removal of my works from the online platform of the Art Toronto 2020. I do not know if it was for the benefit of a specific collective, or a legal decision, or more likely a personal view and taste of an individual. To me, this behavior is familiar. I have grown up in with these views and laws, and I have struggled, but this time it is happening miles away from my geographical, cultural, and social borders in the land of freedoms, a land where many of the people around me dream to be. As I speak to you, freedom of expression in my country has become unrecognizable, and now I am looking for the meaning of freedom of expression in you. In my country, the removal and censorship is justified by order of a dictator. By what right and justification do you remove and censor me? Here, the deprivation of people and the elimination of non-government organizations is done in the name of religion and in the name of a nation, and sometimes in the interest of society. How is this done in your country? I'm writing to you from a land where freedom of expression comes at a high cost, and there are people in my homeland who have suffered a lot in this way and have seen a lot of death and imprisonment. Here in Iran, I am sometimes considered an enemy of the nation and culture, abnormal socially and even alien. Am I an enemy of culture and nation in your country, and a violator of social norms? In my country, it is the personal taste and factional approach of the current pillars of society and government that guarantees the survival of dictatorship. The system of elimination and censorship are the tools that are used to forward this agenda. I come from a land that is tired of this inequality, war, and struggle to be and say. Therefore, in this letter, I do not intend to raise an objection or complaint. I only know my duty to speak and defend my right in a land where I can be heard without fear. Nor does it intend to make an unintentional judgment, and I hope that this omission was not the result of a personal decision to cover up a social or legal sensibility. Because I, through a long process with numerous judges and juries with the support and help of 319272 Foundation in a high-risk path for me and a high financial cost for them, have entered a global exhibition, this most important artistic event. This familiar behavior and conscious removal will trample on the many efforts and hopes that have been made with me in this path. Because unfortunately, in my country, there is a lot of hope for your freedom and your slogans. Amir Khashayar Gassemi, October 31st, 2020, Tehran.
It's an interesting class issue in my mind. You've got an artist who's marginalized in Iran, and he's shocked himself that he's found that his artwork is not acceptable in Canada, of all places, where he had the image that we were a freer society. And in fact, I am not sure that the art fair made a decision that's based on any particular, I don't know if they may have checked with lawyers, but let's not go into that part of it now. Let's talk about just the fact that the artist is using any material whatsoever. And this is burnt remains of something which is dominating his life. He takes these drugs, and you said it's related to the ways he's controlled in his own society, or he himself finds himself in a situation where drugs are a necessity, and he's reaching out and he's creating something through all of his life, and he's doing something with what he has. And I gather that he's got very little, really, and he's using what he has, and he's creating these these pieces of art. It's an expression. I think that the salient issue has to do with the artist speaking and saying something, and that a curator of an art fair's first allegiance is to showing the art and having an understanding of communication between the artist and the public. And certainly the art fair is a conduit for that. But the art fair also dictates what art we in our society will accept and will not accept. And then the question comes as to if the art fair is making decisions for us behind the back, really, of everybody who's going to be going to that fair, because they don't know these stories. If I buy a ticket to that fair, I don't know which art was chosen or why. Then the tastes of Canada are being formed by these decisions. And if the tastes of Canada are so squeamish that they can't show the life and pain of the artist in Iran who's coming to Canada to show his work, that's related to the materials he uses, then all of us are losers. We're all losers because we're not touching on this real life drama and this really important presentation of an individual. That strikes me as being far more relevant than trying desperately to find a reason not to show this work. I mean, you can't, as you said, you can't get high from this burnt
Yeah.
stuff. What are you gonna do? Somebody gonna lick it? I mean,
So
what are
I
we
can
talking about?
I can even add that the artwork we have dated circa 2010 to 2019. So he used these tinfoils in 2010. So almost a decade ago, or a decade ago, at this point. So yeah, there's absolutely no way that, something that was burnt a decade ago and, stored somewhere, wrapped up in, there's absolutely no way that this burnt material could have any sort of street value at this point.
But don't you feel we're getting shoved into a silly discussion? And I know you
Yes.
feel that way. A silly discussion about whether this residue is breaking Canadian law. This strikes me as being not really relevant. And the question comes up as to why anybody would even ask that question. Why would it even come up? Why would somebody say that we're going to be in danger of being arrested because we have this in our gallery? And the fact that they backed down and said, well, you just can't sell it. Oh, please. In other words, they don't want you to sell drugs. Is that the reasoning?
I
Is that the
mean,
reasoning? Really? Yet we can put drugs on display, but they're not sure they're drugs. They're not. It doesn't sound to me like they don't know what they're doing. But the real issue comes down to why are these decisions being made by people who have no real understanding about what these art presentations are about? Surely you brought this artist in. You chose the artist for very good reasons. They're not trusting you. So that's it.
that's true. And again, if I can, I'd like to kind of introduce Babak at this point. So I'm sure you might have, an interesting take on what's happening, since you have done, and you still continue to make such work. So please, um, what do you have to say?
Thank you. And I think uh, I would like to start from the other side as someone who is a proud Iranian by birth and as proud a Canadian citizen for over 30 years by adult conscious choice. I feel like the first things that popped up to my mind while we were having discussion and Kyle was making his observations was where on one side of the world uh, there is oppression, and then on the other side of the world there's suppression of freedom of expression, and it's very strange. And I have a particular affinity, and I felt it personally in my own career and personal life, dealing with the issue of censorship and oppression in Iran, and also observing how rampant drug abuse is in a way being used as a way of oppressing the youth and a large portion of society. in fact, there's good reason to believe that the establishment, the government is involved in the process of propagating and facilitating drug use among a large population of Iran. And I have reason to believe that it is a major problem in Iranian society. And such a cry, and I don't want to be one to judge an art form that I'm not an expert in or I'm not versed in, but just even reading it on paper of burnt heroin on tin foils, developing patterns is almost such a cry for the pain and for the essence of the problem that exists in a society, and the heartfelt letter written by this artist who is reaching out for somewhere else in the world for his voice to be heard. On the other hand, also here, I wish that the curators of this establishment would have been available or would have made themselves available to join this panel tonight and participate in the conversation, because it's an interesting conversation to have with people who make such decisions and the logic that goes behind it. And I think in a way, the very naive conservative approach, and this is my just first reading of what's happening. So it is absurd. I mean, just having this discussion, I must agree with Hooley that this is absurd to even have this discussion of whether or not presenting or selling a work of art that is using the issue itself to provoke, and especially that they're not displaying a bag of heroin or substance, illegal substance. I don't even know where to begin, but I think it's best to use this as an opportunity to discuss where this problem is coming from and what the free world, especially Canadian society, the obligation that we have to reflect, to provide a platform for this pain to be expressed. And what else is art if not to provoke thought and emotion? And I think something like this is a powerful provocation for the viewer, for the participant in the gallery, to understand the pain that exists in there with these dark black lines that are indicative of a major pain that goes beyond addiction and substance abuse, that relates to the pain that exists in a society that women are being thrown acid in their faces and they are the ones who are at fault because they didn't observe their covering properly. We're living in a society where someone who rides on a bicycle, if a woman riding on a bicycle without a scarf, gets sentenced to years and years in prison, but somebody who has outright murdered several people on the streets of Iran and admitted to it roams free and is celebrated as a hero. And I think it's just absurd for us to have a conversation like this on this topic, where the problem is just the tip of an iceberg from a society and a region in the world that is crying out for empathy, that is crying out for support, that is screaming for an understanding of their plight rather than the shallow pragmatism of international diplomacy or the shallow approach towards commerce and commercializing art.
And that's, kind of the angle that it is, because again, having the discussion with, the director of the fair, we applied to this fair as a cultural institution. And as it's been pointed out, the first lines of the Art Toronto Fair are to support, artists and more or less kind of like the intellectual discourse that there is. There's no statement of, this fair is only for capital gains or monetary gains of the selling of artwork. So, to have that be their response is again, as we keep saying, the whole thing, even just having this conversation is absurd.
That's something here, Carl. So leading back to what Babak was saying, it, are we? What is the source of this suppression? And I like that word. Thank you, Babak. We have this decision. Really, it's almost a societal agreement. I'm going to call it an agreement. We have an agreement that we don't do things a certain way. That's what you're up against. This is what you heard from the director of this fair, was that we don't do this, and we're concerned, and would like to tone this down. And we're talking about an artist who is shocked, quite rightly, by the fact that he comes to Canada with his work, or he sends his work to Canada, a place where he feels that at least here people are open and willing to have this dialogue with the artist. And we don't come from a background here in Canada where we have that type of government oppression. But yet we all are in agreement somehow that we want the art to be mild. We want the art not to push through boundaries which might be objectionable. So your experience, Matt, with the gallery owner said, "It's not my fight. I'm going to back away. You push your art someplace else." But and now you feel frozen. And isn't this this is what happens to artists? You won't show your work, and some artists won't even produce their work. They won't do the work because they feel that the society is here with a giving out their sense of taste, and that taste is a never-ending circle of being reinforced constantly. Art fair directors choose things. The people who go to them see that that's what we produce. Somebody tries to rock the boat, tries to make a change, tries to show something that's demanding, such as a criticism of a government, of a country you come from, and that's considered in Canada to be very poor taste, very, very poor taste. We don't do that type of thing. Is that not really a form of an agreement that we have? It's not really censorship in the classical sense of the word. It's almost worse than that. It's an agreement not to allow the artist to truly express their pain, or truly express what they feel, where the art should be coming from, in my opinion, which is someplace deep inside. It's really thinking, okay, it's just commercial. Can we sell this art? The art gallery, the gallery owner says, can I sell it? I don't want to see it on my walls if I can't sell it. What are people going to say when they arrive at this fair? And we all acquiesce to that. And therefore, I would argue, we don't really have a lively visual art community, an art presentation in Canada, where we could have, but we don't. And so back to what Babak was referring to, I'd like to ask the question, where is this coming from? What is the basis of this frozenness and of this lack of desire to really have the passion of art show itself in our galleries? Where does it come from?
If we can refer back to the letter and what Amir was saying in the letter, he comes from a people, as Matt does, as you do, as Babak do, where they are tired. They're tired of fighting. They're tired of having this done to them. They're tired of all of these things. So he wanted to come to a place where he didn't have to fight. He didn't have to go through this process, and he didn't have to censor himself, and he didn't have to.
I think the key is that not only did he not have to fight, but he didn't have to hide his materials. And if referring to what as Sebko just said, I have to ask him a question. Although you may be able to find a route around it, if you leave out the fact that this is residue of the use of heroin, and you yourself said you were stimulated when you knew that, when you found that out, it was stimulating. It puts the art in a different level. That's the point of it as well. I think the art almost doesn't form itself until you have that understanding. And if we have to hide those facts from the art fair people, then we're acquiescing to the thing I was alluding to earlier, which is this demand the Canadian art consumer scene, this demand for things to be not challenging. And I'm actually not sure I would ever blame the public as a whole for being so mild-mannered. I don't think people are like that. I think it's the people who are selling the art and the people who are creating these art fairs who are doing that out of fear. But I just think I wonder if in Canada we want a place where people have to hide their art forms.
See, and
I,
that's
I think also Semco touched on a very important issue here, doing an end run around censorship, the creative process, including circumventing censorship. I think that mentality is justified in an oppressive society, in an authoritarian society where censorship is systemic and is part and parcel of people's lives. As much as I think artists have a duty to push the cracks, to circumvent censorship, to deceive. And I mentioned myself, I made the films that I made in Iran by outright lying to the authorities to be able to make the films that I was making. However, the reverse is I think valid in a free society. We have an obligation to confront suppression. And if it becomes censorship, our obligation if it even becomes stronger. We should in a Canadian society, in the Canadian society, in a democratic country, we cannot just say, oh, well, let's do an end run around system. Let's rephrase it. Let's censor ourselves so that we would be able to do it. No, we must confront. We must hold the system and the establishment to account. And we have a responsibility to do that. Unfortunately, democracy and freedom is not as self-evident as expressed in the American Constitution. It is something that must be constantly the feet of the system, the democratic system, must always be put to fire. And as I think ridiculous as this kind of a conversation over this issue is, I really thank and appreciate you guys, Kyle and Matt, for opening this conversation, because if we let out on these issues, then it's going to follow with other things, and we must, in a free society, uphold the values that society is built on. We cannot just assume that it's going to be there and it's going to happen. This provocation and this confrontation, I think, was necessary, and I'm pretty sure that we are going to have a resolution.
You know, it isn't something which is easy for that artist to decide. That artist is relatively powerless and is going to, and I mean with the greatest respect, but is going to acquiesce to whatever you decide, I think. And the money that you get for the artist surely doesn't pay for the hit on that artist's sensibilities as an artist. If the artist is told, even indirectly, that his choices of medium, which are profoundly important to him, I would say, I mean, those choices were not done unconsciously. If he's told, well, in Canada, as free as you may think it is, really, you what you've done is bad, and the artist may be very polite, but I think the hit is going to be harsh and it's going to be felt deeply. And I wonder if the money compensates for it. I mean, I realize what you're saying. And I wonder if this discussion today doesn't lead us to a conclusion that this is not finished. This discussion and your actions aren't finished, I would say.